Picking up with then the president asked. The president asked why had he returned to France when he did, and not sooner. He had not returned sooner, he replied, simply because he had no means of living in France save those he had resigned, whereas in England he lived by giving instruction in the French language and literature. He had returned when he did, on the pressing and written entreaty of a French citizen who represented that his life was endangered by his absence. He had come back to save a citizen's life and to bear his testimony at whatever personal hazard to the truth. Was that criminal in the eyes of the Republic? The populace cried enthusiastically, "No!" and the president rang his bell to quiet them, which it did not, for they continued to cry, "No!" until they left off of their own will. The president required the name of that citizen. The accused explained that the citizen was his first witness. He also referred with confidence to the citizen's letter, which had been taken from him at the barrier, but which he did not doubt would be found among the papers then before the president. The doctor had taken care that it should be there, had assured him that it would be there, and at this stage of the proceedings it was produced and read. Citizen Gabelle was called to confirm it, and did so. Citizen Gabelle hinted, with infinite delicacy and politeness, that in the pressure of business imposed on the tribunal by the multitude of enemies of the Republic with which it had to deal, he had been slightly overlooked in his prison at the Abbey. In fact, had rather passed out of the tribunal's patriotic remembrance until 3 days ago, when he had been summoned before it, and had been set at liberty on the jury's declaring themselves satisfied that the accusation against him was answered, as to himself, by the surrender of the citizen Evremond called Darnay. Dr. Manette was next questioned. His high personal popularity and the clearness of his answers made a great impression. But as he proceeded, as he showed that the accused was his first friend on his release from his long imprisonment, that the accused had remained in England always faithful and devoted to his daughter and himself in their exile, that so far from being in favor with the aristocratic government there, he had actually been tried for his life by it, as the foe of England and friend of the United States. As he brought these circumstances into view with the greatest discretion and with straightforward force of truth and earnestness, the jury and the populace became one. So when Dr. Manette comes to testify, it's kind of three-part. One, he says, he was my first friend in my exile from France. Then he says, he has always loved my daughter. He has been faithful to my daughter. He has taken care of my daughter and me throughout our exile in England. And 3, he's not liked by the aristocrats of England. He's not like other aristocrats from France who go and try to live off of their titles. Instead, he was tried by the British government as a spy for the United States. And during this time period, the United States and France were allies. Right before, or not at this point, but before the French Revolution. So Dr. Manette gives really compelling evidence that Darnay is not an enemy of France. Picking up with At last, when he appealed by name to Monsieur Lorry, an English gentleman then and there present, who like himself had been witness on that English trial, and could corroborate his account of it, the jury declared that they had heard enough, and that they were ready with their votes if the president were content to receive them. At every vote, the jurymen voted loud and individually. The populace set up a shout of applause. All the voices were in the prisoner's favor, and the president declared him free. So once again, Charles Darnay is a dead man. He's on trial. He's going to be killed. And then in comes this situation where he gets saved. Then began one of those extraordinary scenes with which the populace sometimes gratified their fickleness, or their better impulses toward generosity and mercy, or which they regarded as some set-off against the swollen account of cruel rage. No man can decide now to which of these motives such extraordinary scenes were referable. It is probable to a blending of all the three, with the second predominating. No sooner was the acquittal announced than tears were shed as freely as blood at another time, and such fraternal embraces were bestowed upon the prisoner by as many of both sexes as could rush at him, that after his long and unwholesome confinement he was in danger of fainting from exhaustion, none the less because he knew very well that the very same people carried by another current would have rushed at him with the same intensity to rend him to pieces and strew him over the streets. So this time the mob is a kind mob. They come in to embrace him, to lift him up. And it's pretty overwhelming because Charles knows that had it gone any other way, they would have been rushing at him with very violent intent instead. Picking up with his removal. His removal to make way for other accused persons who were to be tried, rescued him from these caresses for the moment. 5 were to be tried together next, as enemies of the Republic, for as much as they had not assisted it by word or deed. So the next 5 people who are going to be tried aren't tried because they have done anything. They're tried because they didn't actually help the revolution. They've never killed anyone or named anyone. So it's kind of turned on its head here. So quick was the tribunal to compensate itself and the nation for a chance lost that these 5 came down to him before he left the place, condemned to die within 24 hours. The first of them told him so, with the customary prison sign of death, a raised finger, and they all added in words, "Long live the Republic." The 5 had had, it is true, no audience to lengthen their proceedings, for when he and Dr. Manette emerged from the gate, there was a great crowd about it, in which there seemed to be every face he had seen in the court except 2, for which he looked in vain. On his coming out, the concourse made at him anew, weeping, embracing, and shouting, all by turns and all together, until the very tide of the river on the bank of which the mad scene was acted seemed to run mad, like the people on the shore. So the only 2 people that didn't come out in celebration of Darnay's acquittal are Monsieur and Madame Defarge. Picking up what they put him into a great chair they had among them, in which they had taken either out of the court itself or one of its rooms or passages. Over the chair they had thrown a red flag, and to the back of it they had bound a pike with a red cap on its top. In this car of triumph, not even the doctor's entreaties could prevent his being carried to his home on men's shoulders, with a confused sea of red caps heaving about him, and casting up to sight from the stormy deep such wrecks of faces, that he more than once misdoubted his mind being in confusion, and that he was in the tumbrel on his way to the guillotine. In wild, dreamlike procession, embracing whom they met and pointing him out, they carried him on, reddening the snowy streets with the prevailing Republican color, and winding and tramping through them as they had reddened them below the snow with a deeper dye. They carried him thus into the courtyard of the building where he lived. Her father had gone on before to prepare her, and when her husband stood upon his feet, she dropped insensible in his arms. As he held her to his heart and turned her beautiful head between his face and the brawling crowd, so that his tears and her lips might come together unseen, a few of the people fell to dancing. Instantly all the rest fell to dancing, and the courtyard overflowed with the Carmagnole. Then they elevated into the vacant chair a young woman from the crowd to be carried as the goddess of liberty, and then swelling and overflowing out into the adjacent streets and along the river's bank, and over the bridge, the Carmagnole absorbed them every one and whirled them away. After grasping the doctor's hand, as he stood victorious and proud before him, after grasping the hand of Mr. Lorry, who came panting and breathless from his struggle against the watersprout of the Carmagnole, after kissing little Lucy, who was lifted up to clasp her arms around his neck, and after embracing the ever-zealous and faithful Pross, who lifted her, he took his wife in his arms and carried her up to their rooms. "Lucy, my own, I am safe. Oh, dearest Charles, let me thank God for this on my knees, as I have prayed to him." They all reverently bowed their heads and hearts. When she was again in his arms, he said to her, "And now speak to your father, dearest. No other man in all this France could have done what he has done for me." She laid her head upon her father's breast, as she had laid her poor head on her own breast, as he had laid his poor head on her own breast long, long ago. He was happy in the return he had made her. He was recompensed for his suffering. He was proud of his strength. "You must not be weak, my darling," he remonstrated. "Don't tremble so. I have saved him." So here we have Dr. Manette saving Charles Darnay from this from this predicament, this almost surety of death. But the crowds left the courtyard dancing the Carmagnole, and the Carmagnole imitated the mob-like mentality of violence. And so that kind of in itself foreshadows that this is not the end for Charles Darnay, Dr. Manette, or Lucy. It's going to keep going. And so we'll get to that in chapter 7.